This bridge had stood for centuries, its stone foundations bearing the weight of history. As an architect, I understood its structure inside and out. But its history? That was something I had never truly considered until we uncovered what had been buried beneath it. The restoration work had been going on for weeks. Moss clung to the stone, the river whispered beneath us, and time had carved deep fissures into the bridge's surface. My job was simple: reinforce it, make sure it could carry the weight of travelers for another century. But beneath its silent cracks, something had been waiting. That afternoon, the crew was working underneath the bridge, digging carefully around the foundation. Sunlight filtered through the archways, casting shifting reflections onto the rippling water below. Then, a sharp clang rang out. A worker's shovel had struck something solid. Not stone. Something else. Something hollow. The team gathered, murmuring, their faces alight with curiosity. I stepped forward, peering at the partially unearthed shape. At first, it seemed like just cloth, yellowed, waterlogged, clinging to whatever lay beneath. They dug carefully. The smell came first. A damp, rotting staleness, thick with time and decay. And then, bone. A fragile, curled-up skeleton, its frame frail and crumbling, still wrapped in the remnants of the decayed cloth. But the worst part, the hands. Its fingers were wedged into the cracks of the stone, clawing into the very structure of the bridge. Like it had fought. Like it had tried to stop itself from falling. Or worse, like it had tried to crawl out. The air around us turned thick, pressing in like the weight of the entire bridge was listening. I lifted my gaze. The ancient stones above were as still and silent as ever. The river flowed, unbothered. Yet, a chill crept up my spine, sinking deep into my bones. Who was she? How long had she been down there? And why was she trying to hold on? The police arrived quickly. The forensic team examined the remains, confirming that they were too old to determine the cause of death. More analysis would be needed. But as they zipped the body into a bag, I swore. The skull still faced the bridge, watching, even in death. That night, I stayed at a nearby inn. It was old, the walls damp, the scent of mildew clinging to the air. Exhaustion weighed on me, but sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hands, her fingers wedged deep into the stone. A desperate struggle, frozen in time. Eventually, my body gave in. I drifted off and fell into a dream. I was standing on the bridge. Night had fallen, a thick fog curling over the river. The water below was still, too still, like a blackened mirror, reflecting the world above in perfect silence. I glanced down and froze. There was someone else in the reflection. A pale face, sunken eyes, staring up at me. Her lips parted, stretching open, wider than they should have, until her mouth became a void. A soundless scream. I stumbled back, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the bridge, trapped as her reflection crawled closer. The mouth kept stretching, twisting, breaking, until I woke up. Darkness. My heart raced against my ribs, my breath sharp and uneven. I was back in my room. Just a dream. Just. Then I looked down, and my breath died in my throat. The floor was wet. Not damp, not humid, but wet. A darkened stain seeped into the carpet, stretching from the doorway to the side of my bed. A trail, a footprint, as if someone had crawled out of the river, as if someone had stood right next to me, watching. The next morning, I returned to the construction site, an uneasy weight pressing against my chest. But I wasn't the only one who had been plagued by nightmares. A hushed tension clung to the air, workers muttering under their breath, their faces drawn with exhaustion. Some claimed they had passed by the bridge in the dead of night and seen something standing on the water. A shadow, unmoving. Others swore they had heard whispers beneath the stone, a woman crying. But when they stopped to listen, it was only the wind. Or so they told themselves. A creeping dread settled in. I needed answers. I began scouring historical records, combing through dusty city archives, searching for any mention of what might have happened beneath that bridge. Then, in an old newspaper from 1883, I found her name. Elisa von Walther. She had disappeared, last seen standing on the bridge. Locals assumed she had jumped, her heart shattered by a love gone wrong. But her body was never found. My skin prickled. I stared at her name, a strange chill skimming down my spine. It felt like the brush of cold fingers, trailing over my skin. Last night's dream resurfaced. That pale face, mirrored in the water, staring back at me. That night, I tried to sleep. But the dream was waiting. This time, it felt too real. I was under the bridge. The air was thick with silence. No wind. No voices. Only the faint, rhythmic sound of water dripping. Then, something stirred beneath the surface. A hand. Pale. Thin. Reaching. Fingertips breaking the water, groping for something unseen. The river parted. And a face emerged. Elisa. Her hollow eyes fixed on me. And then, I woke up gasping. The room was silent. But the air was heavy, charged with something unseen. Something wrong. I sat up, my breath shallow, my skin damp with cold sweat. Then I looked down. And my blood ran ice cold. The floor was wet. Not just near my bed, but stretching across the room, leading to the door, which was slightly open. A thin gap, as if someone had just stepped out. My stomach twisted. The wind sighed through the window, lifting the curtain ever so slightly. And beyond, the river shimmered beneath the moonlight, its surface rippling. As if something beneath was stirring. As if it had answered a call. There was no escape. Ever since we unearthed the bones beneath the bridge, my dreams had sharpened, no longer fragmented illusions, but something closer to reality. And reality itself was shifting. The hotel was no longer just a place to rest. It had become a silent prison. Every night, the water stains returned, dark, winding trails stretching from the doorway to my bed. Sometimes, I would hear dripping sounds. From the bathroom. From the ceiling. From the corners of the room where no water should exist. Yet every time I turned on the light, the room was dry. But I knew it wasn't just my imagination. That night, I fell into the dream again. But this time, it felt more real than ever. I stood on the bridge. The night was deep, thick as ink, the air humid with something unseen. Below me, the river was not still. It was flowing backward. Like time itself was being reversed. Dark water churned and twisted, revealing the muck and silt buried beneath. Then, she surfaced. A pale body rising slowly from the depths. Her tattered dress clung to her fragile frame, her tangled hair floating like dark tendrils in the water. One hand reached upward, her fingers brushing against the base of the bridge, grasping for something. And then, I saw it. Her fingers were resting inside a crack in the stone. And in that moment, I woke up gasping. Morning. Still shaken, I went to the bridge. I followed the dream, tracing the spot where her hand had been. The workers watched in confusion as I began digging. Then, my fingers touched something solid beneath the mud. I pulled it free, a rusted pocket watch. Its surface corroded with time, its metal caked with dirt and river sludge. And on the cover, a name was engraved. Karl Brunner. My heart skipped a beat. That name, I had seen it in the archives. Karl Brunner. Elisa's lover. The last person she was seen with before she disappeared. And now, his watch was in my hands. I took the watch to the police the next morning. The investigation confirmed my worst fear. Karl Brunner had fled Stuttgart soon after Elisa's disappearance. The authorities suspected foul play but had no solid evidence. Until now, the watch was proof. She had taken it from him. Perhaps in a final struggle. Perhaps as a clue, knowing that no one would believe her if she vanished. Further excavation at the bridge's foundation revealed the truth. Elisa had never jumped. She had been murdered. And during the bridge's construction, her body had been hidden, sealed beneath the stone. For over a century, she had waited. Until now. But the question was, did she only want to be found? At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of water. Not the quiet drip from before. Something deeper, louder, like a river was flowing beneath my floor. I turned and froze. The water stains were spreading, pooling into a dark, endless shadow. The window's reflection shimmered. And in the glass, Elisa stood behind me. Her lips curved into a quiet, knowing smile. The next morning, I woke up in my bed. Everything was calm. Normal. Or at least, it seemed that way. But as I left the hotel, at the far end of the hallway, just before the exit, a trail of wet footprints remained, leading back to the bridge.